Welcome back. Okay. Now we'll see regarding church sui juris. As I said, the churches that govern themselves are the churches sui juris. And in this topic we'll see what are the meanings of the church. You want to listen? Okay. What is meant by the church? What is the meaning of the rite? And their meanings: ascription, transfer, and mode. All the things will be seen in this chapter. One of the questions for the exam. This entire topic. Okay? Entire topic number 4 will be the question for examination. The first one is that all the 24 Catholic churches are independent churches. No one is above the other. It means that they are autonomous churches. Autonomous. That means they are self-governing. Thus they are called 24 churches sui juris. There are 23 Eastern Catholic churches sui juris. And now, what is a church sui juris? CCO Canon 27 explains the description about the church sui juris. A church sui juris is a community of Christian faithful which is joined, that means that community joined together by a hierarchy according to the norm of law, which is expressly or tacitly recognized as sui juris by the supreme authority of the church. The first one is always the assembly, the community. A church is always a community. Never forget, the church always denotes a community of the Christian faithful and who are joined together. That community is together because of a hierarchy. The one authority is placed over them because it's the responsibility of the authority to make sure that this unity in the community is always kept up. So they are together under the authority of this, this authority, hierarchy. According to the norm of law, they cannot act as they want. There are certain rules and regulations, laws are there. They are bound to follow those norms, those regulations. And then they are recognized as a church sui juris by the recognition by the supreme authority of the church. Who is the supreme authority of the church? Roman Pontiff, Supreme Pontiff. So he has to recognize it. Only then it becomes church sui juris. This is the church. So there are 4 elements. Number 1 is it's the community of the faithful. There is hierarchy. Okay. Third one, law is there. Number 4, recognition is there. Recognition. These 4 elements together will give the title church sui juris for a church. Yeah. Any of these elements missing, it cannot be considered as the church sui juris. Okay. The description of rite. What is a rite? Canon 28 of CCO says, as I already mentioned earlier, it is a liturgical, theological, spiritual and disciplinary heritage or patrimony. That's what LTSD. LTSD, simple to remember, no? L, liturgical, T, theological, S, spiritual, D, disciplinary, patrimony. Patrimony means what is received, what is handed over, the traditional, the patrimony, that's the heritage. Just as we have cultural heritage, so also this is a spiritual heritage, liturgical heritage, disciplinary heritage, and one more, theological heritage. Differentiated by the culture and circumstance of the history of the people. So the situations, circumstances. So particular people, okay, of those people, their patrimony. And that is expressed by each church so it is in its own manner of living their faith. So it helps, that patrimony helps the people to live that faith. So as they lived, so also they live. They don't change the patrimony. They don't change it. That's why one Lord, one faith, different forms of worship. Different forms of worship. But one faith, one Lord, but forms of faith for worship are different. Okay? So do not get confused. That's called rite. One is church, another one is rite. These two are different. Do not mix up. Okay? Latin church is different from Latin rite. Okay? Yeah. Ascription. What do you mean by ascription? Incarnation. How a man or woman or a person, how a person becomes a member of a particular church series. Ascription. Very, very important. Ascription is nothing but belonging to the church series by virtue of baptism. All of us become members by baptism, but we all know. So that's called ascription. The following are the instances in which the child is considered as always below the age of 14 years. The child will belong, just correct for yourself. Will belong or belongs to any of the following particular churches series. The first instance, after the two parents, if only father is Catholic, then the child will belong to the Catholic father's church sui juris. That means, suppose mother is Orthodox, father is Catholic, then the child will go to father's church sui juris. That means a Catholic church. Okay. Then second instance, out of the two parents, if only mother is Catholic, then the child will belong to the Catholic mother's church sui juris. So whoever is Catholic is preferred for that. Okay, the child will belong to that one, Catholic. Now the important one comes. If there is a common accord between the parents, if there is a common accord, suppose in the first instance, two parents belonging to one for Catholic, other one non-Catholic, Orthodox. Because father, automatically the church will, suppose father belongs to Orthodox church, non-Catholic. Mother belongs to this one, separate one, another church. If both of them agree that their child should be baptized in the Catholic church, if there is a common accord, common understanding, common agreement, then the child will belong to Catholic church sui juris, mother's church sui juris, mother. Because naturally, supposed to go to fathers normally, but it will go to parent. Suppose, in this connection, what I have to say is, if both parents belong to Catholic church, but different Catholic churches. So normally it's supposed to go to father's Catholic church. But of course father says, okay, let our child be in your Catholic church sui juris. I have no problem. That common accord. So then the child belongs to mother's Catholic church sui juris. Suppose if there is no common accord, the term has to be used. Common accord is important term. Okay. Don't miss the term. Don't write that. Is there agreement? If there's harmonious relationship, all those things will not work. So you have to use that term common accord. Means that's understanding is different. There's no common accord between these two Catholics. different churches of Catholic, different Catholic churches. Automatically the child will go to father's church sui juris. Fifth instance, if a child is born of an unwed mother means no father, no marriage, isn't it? Before marriage, if she becomes mother, then the child is ascribed to mother's church sui juris. It's understood? Because there is no father specified, because no marriage. Next instance, if the child is born of unknown parents, suppose somebody left in the, somewhere after birth, no? They left in the hospital and went away, parents. So nobody knows the parents. Then the child will belong to the caretaker's church sui juris, one who takes care of the child. Belongs to that. Next instance, if in case of an adopted child, then the one who adopted to that church sui juris. In case of non-baptized parents, both are non-baptized. Suppose both are Hindus or Muslims or somebody. Then to which church? Then the one who undertakes Catholic education of the child. To that church sui juris, the child will belong. These are various instances of belongingness or ascription to Catholic church sui juris. Okay? This is only for the children
Below
14 years. Below 14 years. Suppose after 14 years,
they can choose.
yeah, after 14 years, major,
They can choose any right.
they are free to go to any church sui juris. No restriction. No restriction. Now transfer. We have seen first one as ascription. Then now transfer. That means I belong to this one, but I want to go to other church sui juris. How? What is the possibility? What are the ways? In general, what is the requirement? Canons 32 to 35 explain that. When you have time, free time, after your conference exam is over, then you refer the code, because now you may be busy with your preparations. So when you are free, you want to research, you want to verify whether the given content is correct or not. You can verify the code in these canons. In general, it is said what is required to transfer from one church sui juris to another church sui juris. It is, the first one is requirement is consent of the Holy See. Is required, consent of the Holy See. Very important topic this is. What is required? General requirement, what is it? How can the transfer takes place? What are the requirements if I ask in the exam? You must be able to say that for general, the Holy See, consent is required. Number two, that's the direct way of direct consent. The consent of the Holy See is presumed in this case, second case. Presumed when one's own eparchy, means one's own diocese, and the new eparchy, new church, both are in the same territory. Same territory. As I said now, Ernakulam, Angamali, I went and both are side by side, same territory. The eparchial bishops of the two eparchies, the two diocesan bishops of the two dioceses, consent to the transfer in writing. If both bishops agree, in writing, then the Holy See permission is presumed. So they don't need to go to the Holy See anymore, because same territory, both old and new, are situated in the same territory. Suppose somewhere one is in Kerala, other one is in Africa, two different territories. So there it is, we have to apply there. Okay? From Sirabalankara to Ruthenian or Eritrean or Ethiopian church, not possible, because two different territories. Suppose Malankara, Malabar, dioceses are close by, yeah, or Latin close by. If the bishops agree in writing, okay, I have no problem to go from my church to other church sui juris. I have no problem to receive you from the other church sui juris to my church sui juris. If they give in writing that consent, the consent of the Holy See is presumed. So don't have applying to the Holy See. So this is the first way of transfer. General transfer. General transfer. Now we see other transfers, other ways of transfer to another church sui juris. At the time of marriage, wife is presumed to transfer to the church sui juris of her husband at the time of marriage. Amma వెళ్ళిపోతుంది. The bride goes to the bridegroom's church sui juris. Suppose the marriage is ended. Marriage is ended. The wife can freely return to the original church sui juris. Suppose there took place some annulment due to the defect in consent at the time of marriage, no? Isn't it? It's the consent what makes a marriage, isn't it? If there is any defect in the consent, that marriage is considered as null and void. Okay? Suppose the marriage is ended with that, or one of the partners die, marriage is ended, isn't it? Then the other partner can go back to original church sui juris. That's one instance, another instance. So general one instance, then secondly at marriage. Then third one is if parents transfer to another church sui juris, then the children below the age of 14 also will go to the new church sui juris. So along with children. Nowadays in the NEP 2020, no? What is NEP? National Educational Policy. Isn't it? In that one, so everywhere the children should have always study there, and then the local language should be learned. In the local language, the classes will be taken in the primary section. That's the rule. The problem comes. Suppose if the parent gets transferred from one state to another state, what will be the situation of the child? Language not known, difficult. Here, it's something like that. The children below the age of 14 also will move along with the parents on transfer. Then, it's not there. Mixed marriages. We all know mixed marriages, no? Among Christians, marriages that take place among the baptized, among different Christian churches. If only one parent transfers to another church sui juris, then the children below the age of 14 will also transfer, provided there is a common accord between the parents in the mixed marriages. To which church sui juris? The church, because all Christian churches are. Then marriage between Catholics. If only one parent transfers to another church sui juris, then the children below the age of 14 years will also transfer, provided there is common accord between or among the parents. After the age of 14 years, the children can freely return to the original church sui juris. So all these are various instances. In the last instance, baptized non-Catholics. Baptized non-Catholics means other Christians coming into full communion with Catholic Church. Hello? Yeah? Coming into full communion with the Catholic Church. Retain and practice their own right, and observe it everywhere in their Catholic counterpart. Suppose there is Melkite, let's say Greek Orthodox Church is there. There is non-Catholic but baptized, isn't it? Baptized non-Catholic Church, Greek Orthodox Church. Suppose if they want to, one or two of them, if they want to come in communion with the Catholic Church, then what happens? They need to obtain the permission of the Holy See, but at the same time, they will be directed there is a counterpart. You don't need to join the Latin church. Your counterpart is there, Catholic Church. Greek Catholic Church is there. So you go to that. You go to that. Don't join any other Catholic Church. Because Latin Church is very famous, you don't need to come to the Latin Church from Greek Orthodox Church. The counterpart is there. Greek Orthodox Church counterpart is Greek Catholic Church. So the same type of worship, everything, traditions will be maintained. So you move to that Catholic Church. No need of changing your Catholic Church. That's what. If there is no Catholic counterpart, then they are free to choose any Catholic rite they want. They are free to choose. Yes. Do you follow? Transfers. Okay. Yeah. General, then marriage, transfer of the parents, mixed marriages, marriages between Catholics and baptized non-Catholics coming into full communion with the Catholic Church. These are the 6 instances where transfer is possible, requirements. Then we have the mode of ascription. Mode of ascription. Ascription takes effect from the moment, how this ascription takes place? From the moment of declaration before the local hierarch of the same church or proper pastor or priest delegate by either of them and 2 witnesses. So they have to go and read. They have to go and read the declaration. This change of church sui juris has to be noted in the baptismal register where baptism took place. Very, very important. Or in a document of the parish or church sui juris to which ascription was made. Either here or in that one. It has to be mentioned clearly. Brothers, noting down in the register is a must. Never forget. Never forget. Otherwise, there will be a lot of problems in the future. We will become the cause of suffering for the parties, marriage parties afterwards, later on. That's why always best thing is prepare the register before the sacrament takes place. Ritual takes place. Prepare the register. Keep the pen. Everything, all the columns fill and keep. And then as soon as the ritual is over, immediately their signatures or your signature must be there by all means. In the remarks column immediately should be done. Suppose, for example, you are baptizing at the time of marriage. Immediately in the remarks column you have to mention baptized on this day at marriage, before marriage. You have to mention that. Suppose you are blessing a wedding with a dispensation from the disparity of cult. You have to mention the remarks column. That means the Hindu party, that means non-Christian party remains as non-Christian. Catholic party remains as Catholic even after the wedding, which takes place in the Catholic Church. Because dispensation is given to different religions. So you have to mention them. If you don't mention, finished. Should I tell one instance, case? Last Sunday, not this Sunday, the previous Sunday, I went for a wedding. Since my relations, I they inform the parish priest that our priest is there, so he will come and he will bless the wedding and so on. Father, I request you kindly accept. So I accepted, no problem. He called me and said, I delegate you to do it. Then I said, Father, you also be there. Together we'll do. I'll do the blessing, there's no problem. So after going there, Father asked, why don't you also celebrate Mass and preach? And I said, no, you be the parish priest now, so you celebrate Mass, be the main celebrant. I'll preach and then bless the wedding. Okay, he said. Then solemn Mass, preaching was over, homily was over, wedding was officiated, assisted at the wedding. We are the qualified assistants, we are called, okay? We are not celebrating marriage, they are celebrating marriage. Okay. The parties are celebrating marriage. We are not celebrating marriage. We are only assisting at marriage. Okay. Then after the wedding was over, mass was over, what takes place? Immediately after wedding, mass is over. Signatures of the both parties, and then who are the others? Two witnesses, and then
Parish priest. Delegate.
witness, official witness. Yeah. Don't say minister. Okay. They are the ministers of marriage. Okay. Don't say ministers. Baptism minister. Yeah. No problem. Sign. So I was waiting. Marriage was over. Then before the final hymn, in front of the sanctuary, there are two more pews. This side one pew, separate one. This side is like pedestal. So choir was on this side, and this side was meant for announcements. There was pedestal. So parish priest took the register there, and then called the parties, and then getting them signed. I was just came in front of the altar, like this sanctuary was there. I was just waiting, because so many are there, no? So many were there. No, it should not be a crowd. So I was waiting. Let all finish signatures, then I will go and sign. Waiting. So parties finished, witnesses finished. It's like this, no? Then immediately parish priest, the register was like this. After they finished the signatures, he's left-handed. Immediately parish priest took this pen. Okay, over. Over. I was waiting, I was surprised. Should I go and ask or no? Because people are there, embarrassing situation. Signatures. But it remained a bit confusion for me. Yeah, because tomorrow anything comes, problem. Yeah, signature is was his. Then I want to ask in the sacristy while investing. Unfortunately, there are some nuns there also, sacristans, no? So can't ask in front of them. I kept quiet. I had rushed immediately for a funeral mass. So I thought, okay, let me see later. Went back. I must tell the parish priest. Sometimes he may do the same way with other priests also. If I don't say, if I just say, okay, let it go, if I leave it. Then afterwards, not to embarrass the parish priest, I called him, but there is no response. So good that there is no response. I'm a bit angry that these things. Then I left a message saying that, Father, I forgot to sign in the register. I forgot to sign in the register. Unfortunately, you too forgot to remind me to sign in the register. So kindly bring the register, if possible, at the earliest, so we complete the process. Then he replied saying that, okay, we'll bring the register. I am at home now, he said. Immediately after, before wedding he was at home, immediately after the wedding also at home. So then he said, okay, after returning I will bring this register. Yesterday while traveling, he sent me a message. Father, when can I bring the register? Send back the message. Sorry, Father, I'm out of station. Going for classes. Afterwards, we'll see. Thank you. Sign. Documents. Always very, very important. Very important. Never forget. So, mode of ascription takes place like this. Declaration, reading out of this decree in front of the parish priest or the new parish priest, reading in the presence of two witnesses, and that is entered in the register, baptism register, or in the new parish, anywhere it can be registered. Then ascription is complete. So this is what we have seen in this chapter regarding what is church sui juris, what is a right, what is ascription to a church sui juris, what is the transfer from one church sui juris to another church sui juris, what is the mode of ascription. All these 5 elements we have seen in this chapter. Okay, now we move on to the next main chapter. Question, okay? Question. I can ask as main question as one, or I can also ask regarding one particular church. Explain the powers of patriarch or powers in the patriarchal churches. Patriarchs' powers are different. Major archbishops' powers are different from powers in the patriarchal church, powers in the major archiepiscopal church. Okay. This is a hierarchy we are going to see. Patriarchal churches, major archiepiscopal churches, metropolitan churches, other churches sui juris. These are the different ranks. First, second, third, and fourth level. Different ranks, gradations. Never miss this. Okay. So, before we begin, we'll take a short pause before we begin this hectic one. Okay, we'll take a short pause. Okay, welcome back, and we'll have the new topic, hierarchy in Eastern churches. Under that, the 4 ranks of churches. The higher the rank, higher autonomy, more autonomy. Lower in the rank, less autonomy. But all are Catholic churches. Okay? So patriarchal churches. We first take patriarchal churches. Patriarchal churches are headed by patriarchs. The very word patriarch contains pater, means father, isn't it? That's why patriarch is the father and head of the patriarchal church. A patriarchal church is invested the highest grade of ecclesial autonomy among churches, and is provided with various organs having legislative, judicial, and administrative powers. Please note, patriarchal churches and major archiepiscopal churches, the powers are same. Listen to one, then it will be applicable to the other also, with minute differences, 1 or 2 aspects. Otherwise, everything is same, all powers same as patriarchal churches, also in the major episcopal churches. So listen well. The first one is election of patriarchs. Canons 63 to 77 you find regarding election. A patriarch is canonically elected in the synod of the patriarchal church. The synod is normally consists of a patriarch, 4 bishops, all the bishops of the patriarchal church. Synod comprises of all the bishops in the patriarchal church. So everybody is a member. Just as we have CBCI here, all the bishops of the Catholic Church, inclusive of Syro Malabar Malankara, CBCI. Okay. Suppose there is only for Latin bishops there is one more. Now what is that? CBCI means Catholic Bishops Conference of India, which comprises bishops of all the 3 rites, 3 churches. Latin Church, Syro Malabar, Syro Malankara churches. There is one more organ, Episcopal Conference, only for Latin bishops. What is that called in India? CCBI, Conference of Catholic Bishops of India. Okay, one is CBCI, other one is CCBI. One is for all the churches, other one is for the bishops of Latin Church. Okay. So also, Synod of Bishops of Patriarchal Church will have as its members all the bishops of the Patriarchal Church. Sometimes they are archbishops, but metropolitans, they are called metropolitan archbishops, bishops. All of them are part of this synod. So the synod is the one that elects patriarch. Now, the place of election, either in the patriarchal residence or in another place designated by the administrator of patriarchal church with the consent of the permanent synod. Why the administrator there?
Is the next two.
Administrator. Suppose when the patriarchal church falls vacant, then the administrator is the one, no, who has to convene the assembly, the synod. Okay, that's why. The residence of the patriarch or in another place designated by the administrator with the consent of the permanent synod. What is this permanent synod? Permanent synod consists of a permanent synod. Second thing, just see, second point. Permanent synod consists of a patriarch plus 4 bishops. These 5 are called permanent synod. 4 plus 1, 1 plus 4. Patriarch and 4 bishops. Out of these 4 bishops, 3 are elected by the synod and 1 is nominated by the patriarch. That is called permanent synod. So, to shift the place of election from patriarchal house to another place, the administrator requires the consent of this permanent synod. So, other 4 bishops will be there. So, they have to give consent, not just consultation, consent. It has to be given. Then only it will be convened in certain place. Number 3, synod of bishops must be convened within 1 month of vacancy. Within 1 month of the vacancy of the patriarchal see. If there is any other particular law exception to this norm, it should not be more than 2 months. See, I said now principle of subsidiarity. Particular norm. The particular norm says, okay, it can go beyond 1 month, no problem. Universal law says 1 month it gives. Within 1 month of vacancy, it should be convened. Synod has to be convened. Particular law can make some exception to that, but should not be more than 2 months. Okay? So within 2 months, it has to be convened by all means. Then only the members of the Synod of Bishops of the Patriarchal Church have an active voice. Active voice. Active what? Only of that church. No guests, no invitees, no scrutinies. Yeah? In the election time, scrutinies will be there. No? All this will not have any vote, active vote. No. Suppose some of those who have already retired, emeritus, as per the norms, if they are not the members of the synod, but they are also bishops, emeritus. They can come for the synod, but they will not have active vote. They will not have active vote. Then, number 5, during the election, no one other than the members and the clerics who are scrutinizers and secretaries is present in the hall. No interference from outsiders. It is just like electing a pope, isn't it? Electing a pope. So that's why, have you seen the election process? Once all the cardinals are inside the Sistine Chapel, all the officials, everybody, he will go and announce, the MC, will go and announce what? Extra omnis. Means others, all others out. Extra, out. Outside. Omnis, all others, out. Then all will go, officials all will go out. Then he will go and he will close the door. So media, no more for media. What happens? It's all same. No others other than these scrutineers, secretaries should be there. Then the synod is declared as canonically convoked. When does the synod is convoked canonically? When do we say that the synod is canonically convoked? When do they say? The synod is declared as canonically convoked and can proceed with election only when 2/3 of the bishops attend. 2/3 of the synod of bishops attend. Otherwise, that synod is invalid. 2/3, that means more than the absolute majority. More than the absolute majority. Okay. Absolute majority is, what is absolute majority? Suppose for 100. 2/3 is different. Absolute majority? Half plus 1. Half plus 1. Absolute majority. Isn't it? More than half. Absolute majority. 2/3 is more than that. 2/3 is more than that. Okay. That means almost 80 or 75, 80 of them out of 100 should be. Okay. Then only then it is called canonically convoked. It has to be, the members should be at least 2/3, and then it is valid, canonically convoked. Then number 7, whoever obtains 2/3 of votes is considered as elected. 2/3. If no one gets it, after at least 3 ballots, absolute majority of the votes will be enough. So thrice it will go for a 2/3 majority. 3 ballots will go. Even after the 3 ballots, no one gets 2/3 majority, then they say, okay, we'll go ahead with the absolute majority. It's a half plus 1. Half plus 1 is enough. Number 8, if the election is not brought to completion within 15 days, 15 days or hours, still one ballots, no one is elected still, then from the opening of the synod, 15 days, within that time they have to elect patriarch. If they fail to elect, then the matter devolves to the Roman pontiff. They will have to, they have to renounce their right to elect. So that's why within 15 days. Otherwise, Roman pontiff will take the matter to his hands. Suppose once one is elected, a person, means one person gets 2/3 majority. What will the process? The one who is elected has to give consent, because it's an ecclesiastical office, main ecclesiastical office. By all means, he has to give consent, not consultation. It cannot be thrust upon. So he has to give the consent first. If he gives consent, then follow proclamation, announcement, no? Proclamation and enthronement. Enthronement as the patriarch. Then the synod of bishops has to inform the Roman pontiff by means of synodal letter. Information, not for confirmation. Please note this. Whereas the difference between major archbishop selection, patriarch selection comes here. While the patriarch's election, proclamation, enthronement is informed to the Roman pontiff, Holy See, through a letter, synodal letter. Whereas major bishop's case is different. Once he is elected, given consent, it has to be sent to the Roman pontiff for the confirmation. Confirmation. He has to confirm. Until he confirms, they cannot declare. They cannot go ahead with the announcement and enthronement. No, not possible. So confirmation has to be given. That's first, through a synodal letter. And also, the one who is elected as major archbishop, he has to request in writing that I am willing, kindly kindly confirm my election. Okay, here it is information. When I ask you the difference in your exam, suppose if I ask the difference, what is the difference in the election between patriarch election and major archbishop's election? You must be able to say this. Information to the Holy See with regard to the election of the patriarch, whereas confirmation is required from the Holy See with regard to the election of the major archbishop. Okay, this is very, very important difference. The contents of the synodal letter, what should be in that synodal letter? The first one is that the synod is convoked canonically. What does it mean by canonical convocation of synod? What do you mean by that? That there are 2/3 of the members took part in the synod, okay, in the given place. That is called canonical convocation of the synod. So that is done, number one, in the letter is to mention. Then, election and enthronement are carried out canonically as per law, and also of the profession of faith and promise to exercise the office faithfully made by the new patriarch in the presence of the synod according to the approved formula. So he has promised profession of faith. It's done. So this is what the content of the synodal letter. Then this synodal letter is also to be sent to the patriarchs of other Eastern churches, other patriarchs. This letter has to be circulated. Roman Pontiff is one of the patriarchs, like that, no? Patriarch of the West, they say. Other patriarchs of the East, they have to send that synodal letter. Number 6, the new patriarch must request as soon as possible ecclesiastical communion from the Roman Pontiff by means of a letter signed in his own hand. His own hand. No scanned signatures allowed. In his own sign. Why ecclesiastical communion has to sort?
Because all church will be common.
Naturally. If it doesn't ask for a request, if it doesn't request for ecclesiastical communion, the church is no more Catholic. It has gone breaking with the Catholic Church, communion with the Catholic Church. Okay, that's why he has to request. Number 7, the patriarch validly exercises his office only after the enthronement with the full effects of the law. Only after enthronement, not before. Before that, he cannot convoke the synod nor ordain bishops. No. Okay. Another important question. Let me say, hereafter, everything is important. Everything is important because only points are mentioned. Important points are mentioned. That's why everything is important. Powers of patriarch. Brothers, in nutshell, let me say, first introduction to this topic is that patriarch or major archbishop, they are not the absolute power in their churches. They have only administrative powers. That means executive powers they have. Executive or administrative powers they have. Patriarch or major archbishop. The legislative power and the judicial power rests with the who is that? Synod of bishops. Synod of bishops. Law making, no? Just like parliament, law making body in the country. So synod, all bishops, they make the laws. Then judiciary, again synod, the judiciary, judicial power it has got. Only executive powers, like governments, no? Only have by patriarch. Nature of his power. His power over all the faithful of his church is ordinary. Ordinary means not simple. Okay. Ordinary means primary. Let's say primary. Ordinary. Extraordinary comes only in the absence of ordinary. Okay. Extraordinary comes only in the absence of ordinary. Otherwise, the primary power he has. And proper means it belongs to him. Belongs to him. And but personal. Yeah. Therefore, the patriarch cannot constitute a vicar for the entire patriarchal church, not delegate his power to anyone for all cases. For all cases, general, what is no vicar general. Like vicar general means he will be allotted certain powers only, not for entire all the powers. He will not give delegation for that. Okay. The scope of his power, he can validly exercise his power only within the territorial boundaries of the patriarchal church, unless the nature of the matter or the common or particular law approved by the Roman Pontiff establishes otherwise. So within his territory, he can exercise. That's the scope, limits of his power. Number 3, patriarch is the representative of the patriarchal church in all juridical matters. Representative, okay? Representative. Suppose there is a case, civil case or case against the church with other churches, anything like that. So he will represent the patriarchal church. Number 4, as I said earlier, he has only administrative powers. He has only administrative powers. Those administrative powers now we will see according to different gradation. Okay. The first one is obligations of patriarch concerning metropolitans and other bishops. Metropolitans means archbishops. That's all. Archbishops. Don't get confused with the metropolitan churches sui juris. Their heads are called metropolitans. Those metropolitans are different from these metropolitans. Okay, board lay like explain. Suppose metropolitan church is this. The patriarchal church is this. In this one, in this church, there are archdioceses which are named as metropolitans, archbishops. Then bishops, eparchies. Within that metropolitan, there are also eparchies. Bishops, archbishops, pope. Like that. Also here, patriarchs, metropolitans, bishops. Follow? Don't get confused with metropolitan of the metropolitan church sui juris. That's different church altogether. He's different head altogether. Okay? Do you follow? Do you follow? Do you follow? Good. The first one, he has to exercise the rights and fulfill the obligations of a metropolitan wherever there is no province erected. There are provinces. Province means different dioceses together as one province. For example, in the Latin Church here in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, how many provinces are there? 2 provinces, isn't it? One is Hyderabad, Visakhapatnam. 2 provinces like that. So like that, the patriarch has to fulfill the rights and obligations of a metropolitan wherever there is no province erected. Number 2, he has to supply for the negligence of metropolitans as per the norm of law. Suppose if these archbishops, if they fail to do that, he has to do it. That's why he has to always vigilant. Vigilance must be there. He has to make sure that metropolitans are for carrying out their own duties. Otherwise, what happens? He has to carry out. Okay? Then, when metropolitan see falls vacant, he has to fulfill all the responsibilities of the metropolitan province. If a metropolitan has not appointed a finance officer, he has to warn the metropolitan first. And still if the warning is not cared for, then he has to appoint personally the finance officer. See that, what a responsibility. He has to go down to that. He has to see to that. Then he has to make known the acts of the Roman Pontiff to the eparchial bishops and all those who are concerned. So whatever Roman Pontiff gives, the documents, decrees, all those things, he has to forward to all the bishops. then all the obligations of the eparchical bishops mentioned in Canon 196 will also bind the patriarch, because patriarch also is a bishop altogether, isn't it? Isn't it? He is like first among the equals. That's it. So he also applied to him. Number 7, he is to see that the eparchical bishops faithfully fulfill their pastoral function and that they reside in the eparchy that they govern. Residence is a must, not always roaming around. Yeah? So he has to make sure that bishops don't go around, they reside in the eparchy. He has to enkindle their zeal. If they gravely transgress, he has to warn after consulting the permanent synod. And if the warning does not result in desired effect, he has to defer the matter to the Roman Pontiff. Because Roman Pontiff has the right to judge, isn't it? Right to judge the bishops in criminal cases and so on. Only Roman Pontiff. So that's why he has to, Naina, Babu, please correct yourself. Warn, giving warnings, still not heeded, then go to Roman Pontiff. Next. Okay. Functions by his own right. His own right. Means no one can delegate these things. No one can, let's say, block him from this normal. Number 1, he can issue decrees regarding the observance and application of the law. Yeah. Means he can interpret the law. Interpretation. Very, very important. Because there is always a law is there, but how to follow, how to apply that law in particular given situation, that he has to interpret. He can issue decrees. He can direct instructions to all the faithful in order to explain the sound doctrine. Just explain sound doctrine, foster piety, correct abuses, and approve and recommend practices that foster spiritual welfare of the faithful. What to do, what not to do, he has to see to that. He can issue encyclical letters to his church regarding his own church and rite. And so just like Roman Pontiff to the Latin Church, so also Patriarch to his church. He can issue orders to all his bishops, clerics, members of the instituted consecrated life to have his decrees, instructions, and encyclical letters read and publicly displayed in their churches or houses. You can tell that also. Yeah. By the way, I forgot to say one thing before in the introduction to Oriental Canon Law. The code, Latin code has two division of the faithful, bipartition. Two faithful are divided into two. What are they? Latin code. People of God are divided into two categories. What are they? Bipartition, it is called. Two categories of faithful, baptized, people of God. Who are they? Two categories. Baptized and faithful. What is that? Very good. Exactly, very good. Clerics and laity. These are the two categories of the people of God mentioned in the Latin code. Whereas Oriental code, please, very, very important difference. This is Oriental code has got tripartition. That is, one is laity, okay, then clerics, then between these two, religious. Between these religious. So they are recognized as separate group. Whereas Latin code says all the religious who are not clerics are considered as laity. Okay? All the religious who are not clerics are considered as laity. That means all nuns, sisters, everybody under laity category comes in Latin code. Whereas here Oriental code gives a special status for them. Consecrated people, so separate. So the tripartition.